sempre bom começar uma palestra com algo que mexe com o público. Tudo bem? Hã? Perfeito. Todos seus carros foram roubados. E seus cargos também serão. That's to start well. Desculpe se sigo a palestra em inglês. I will talk about the creator economy. And my journey started at Singularity University, which is at the NASA Ames Research Park in Silicon Valley, in California. I will try to speak slow, because I know some of you have the headsets, and I don't want to lose any of you during the conversation, which is a lot of slides, so I'm going to try to go fast, but speak slow. Singularity University is an organization started by some of the greatest minds on the planet. One of the co-founders is Ray Kurzweil, who is a long-time futurist and inventors and entrepreneurs, started more than 20 $100 million companies. And most recently, he was hired as his first job, because he was never employed by someone. He was always starting companies as an entrepreneur. He was hired by Larry Page, who runs Google, and as director of engineering. And also this guy here, Peter Diamandis, a great visionary and a good friend. And you can see him here flying in space with Elon Musk and James Cameron. This is actually not space. They are simulating space by flying with a company called Zero G, which Peter has started. They do suborbital flights and they go up and down very fast. And while you descend, you have microgravity environment for 30 seconds. And you do about 20 of them. It's a lot of fun. Huh? And this is the book that I'm known for now. Robots will steal your job, but that's okay. And in here, I talk about a few things which gather the attention of some very influential people, including also this guy who has a small startup in Silicon Valley, you might have heard of. And the subject is this, technological unemployment. Now, what does it mean? It means this. This is the most important picture of the decade, I think. And if you remember anything about today, remember this picture here. This shows the number of people employed in the US in the motor vehicle industry on the left. And on the right, you see one pixel. Can you see? That's the number of people employed in Google for the driverless cars, the autonomous vehicles, the one that drive without any human driver, or any remote operators. They do everything autonomously. Now, this is a very low estimate, actually, the one of the US motor vehicle industry. Because to be fair, that only represents the engineers, the drivers, the people who are specifically working full-time on the US motor vehicle industry. You have all the industries that are related to it and that survive precisely because that exists. Just think about all the people offering food and a place to sleep to all the truck drivers when they drive cross-country or cross-continents. Think about all the industries that work with the US motor vehicle industry, and without them, they wouldn't even exist, or they would have 60% or 80% of their business disappear. But on the right, you don't need 400 different industries making autonomous vehicles. You maybe need 5 or 6. Google, Tesla, Uber, Apple, and of course, BMW, Toyota, and blah, blah, blah. They are trying, but they're falling behind because they are not innovative enough. So even if you take that number and you multiply it by 1,000, 3 orders of magnitude, so 100 becomes 100,000. Okay? So let's take all of the car manufacturers in the world and all of the startups and all of the engineers and all of the app developers and all of the designers and marketeers, everyone whose job will be working on autonomous vehicles. Maybe 100,000, but that's globally. That's 4 million people just in the US. It's more than 100 million people globally. So you're taking away 100 million jobs, and you're only creating 100,000. So this is the most important picture of the decade. And nobody talks about this, almost. I talk about that. And the reason I could see this, because I looked at the data. I don't have a crystal ball. I'm not a futurist in the sense that I make predictions. I make forecasts. I look at trends, I look at data, and I try to see where things are going with what's called the cone of uncertainty. So you don't know exactly what's going to happen and when, but you know the direction and the degree of uncertainty in a specified timeline. And this is the data that I was looking at. Now again, this is US, but it's not specifically the US. In Europe, we have similar data. I couldn't find reliable data quickly enough for Brazil, but I'd be curious to see the results there. This is the civilian to employment population ratio. It means how many people are working as opposed to the total able population. That's corporate profits. Same amount of time. Put them together. Can you see a relationship? Now that, just in case you're wondering, is the financial collapse of 2008. But corporate profits was just a small blip, came back up like nothing. The gray lines are recessions. And if you look at the green, that is the recovery. So when you have a recession, you want a recovery that is 90 degrees, an angle like this. So in the 1980s, you had a recovery that was almost perfect. But as you have recessions into the future, you have shallower and shallower and shallower degrees of recovery. So what does that mean? It's almost flatlining. In economics, it's called a jobless recovery. So you have a recession, then the economy grows again, you're making profits, but you're not employing people anymore. So you have a recovery without jobs. This is the picture. You have corporate profits at all-time high. Never been this high in the history of, since we have data. Employment, multi-decade low. You could say, oh, but employment was lower in the 50s and 60s. Yeah, women weren't working because they were not allowed to. So before 1979, the data is useless to compare. So this is the lowest it has ever been. And you have the shallowest jobless recovery. So these three things combined, to me, means technological employment, among other things, but mostly means that. And I'm not the only one. Oxford researchers came out with a paper last year showing that 45% of all jobs will be automated in the next 20 years for the US. A few months later, a similar study concluded that 52% of all jobs will be automated in Europe within the next 20 years. And now there are new studies coming out showing that it will happen to South America, it will happen to China, it will happen to Japan, it will happen to every country. So I came to the same results 2 years before. I've been saying this for 5 years now. When I started, they said, you're crazy. You're a computer scientist. You're a filmmaker. You are, you're a developer. You are an AI researcher. You don't know anything about the economy. You should just shut up and let the professionals deal with it. You're not an MIT professor or researchers from Oxford. Okay, I said, but if it's true that new technologies create new jobs, then in the last 50 or 60 years, we should have many new professions created that employ people in new kinds of jobs, right? It's just logical. So I made a list. I went to the Federal Reserve and I looked at the list and I said, okay, what is the job, the type of job that employs the most people? And it was transportation. Oh, guess what? That's going away in 5 to 10 years. And then retail salesperson. And go and go and go. I said, So when is the first job that was invented in the last 50 years coming? And you had to go down a lot. In fact, number 33, computer programmers. And all the jobs before, you put them together, it was about 50%. And I estimated that about 5%, or 10% of that 50%, would be able to keep their job because they would be the superstars. They would be the ones that can innovate within a dying industry so they can stay ahead of the curve. So I made a back-of-the-envelope calculations, and I said 45% of all jobs will be lost within the next 20 years. And they said, oh, that's crazy. And then the next year, Oxford researchers say 45% of all jobs will be automated. They're like, oh, you're a great forecaster. Suddenly, I had all the credibility. And it wasn't that I was looking at a crystal ball. I was just looking at the data. Just look at the trend and the data. Don't believe pundits. Believe the data. Look at the companies. That's their market cap or valuation. Those are the number of employees, and that's the value per employee. You have Walmart and McDonald's that employ millions of people, and the value per employee is $100,000. Look at WhatsApp, 16 billion with 55 employees. That's $290 million per one employee. So newer companies employ fewer and fewer people, and they have higher and higher market cap. Why? Because technology. You have a process of what Buckminster Fuller called the ephemeralization. You can make more with less. This means that you can access the global market at very low cost of entry. It used to cost $1 billion to start an industry. Now it can cost $1,000 to start a company. So you have a reduction of 1 million-fold in just 30 or 40 years. You wanted to disrupt an entire industry, you need 3 smart people in a garage. You don't need an infrastructure and billions in revenue or capital. And this is exactly what's happening. And that's because of digitalization. It's because of automation. It's because of computer science and artificial intelligence and robotics. So this picture here is not the picture of the motor vehicle industry. This is the picture of every industry, given enough time. If it's not 5 years to 10, like it is in the motor vehicle, it may be 20 to 25, or maybe 25 to 30. But it's not going to be 200. It's within our lifetime, and everything is going to change. So how do you stay relevant? How do you survive this economic turmoil? Because business is changing, and it's changing very fast. Just how fast is changing, you might be asking? Well, let's look at the numbers again. 89% of all Fortune 500 companies from 1955 were not in the list last year. 89% disappeared. Remember Kodak? Who's old enough to remember Kodak? Wow, okay. Huh? Kodak had the Kodak moment for 35, 40 years, was the leader in the industry. You took a picture and you printed a picture, and that was the Kodak moment. But then they had the Kodak moment when they were valued $20 billion and they were employing 150,000 people. And then 3 years later, they were bankrupt and they were valued at minus $1 billion. And that was 2013. In the same year, Instagram sold to Facebook for $1 billion. And Instagram was what? A digital photography company. Now, the irony of the story, you know what this is? Kodak invented digital photography, and then they said, "Oh, this is for kids." Every industry is going to be like that if they're not ready to change and adapt very quickly. Because in the next 10 years, it is forecasted that 40%, in 10 years, 40% of all Fortune 500 companies will disappear from the list. Because if it took 60 years, it's going to take 10, and then it's going to take 5. And then, if you want to stay relevant, every year, a multi-billion-dollar giant can die. Every single year. It's not going to take 20 years for your business to go bankrupt, to have 100,000 employees, to be on the street. We started the revolution of the growth period of the 60s and 70s with the consumer economy. And then we moved to the creator economy. And now Paul Sappho is talking about this transition. You are a creator even when you think you're consuming. When you search on Facebook, your search query has value. That's a product. So you consuming is actually creating. When you post on Twitter, you think you're using the product, but you're actually generating value for Twitter, which is only providing the infrastructure. And all of us are creating value for Twitter, which is now, several billions of dollars. So now we are leading into the creator economy. But what I suggest is that we are really moving to the superstar economy. And the superstar economy looks like this. This is the share of the pie for the music industry. This is the top 1% of artists that have 77% of all the revenue. It's been true that the top performers had more, but it's never been so much. And it's only going to get worse at this rate, because it's processes of positive feedback loops that feed on each other, and when once becomes a little bit more famous, it becomes more and more famous because it feeds into a giant machine of social media and of sharing and Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and blah, 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 and Spotify. So, and then there are algorithms that select for things that are more popular. So this is the picture of the music industry, but really every industry is moving into that direction. And the same goes for wealth. So I had to restructure the diagram because it was so big. The top 25% actually has, this is the global wealth in the world. Top 25% has more than 85% of all the wealth. And the top 2% has more than half. What's probably more astounding is that the top 300 people, not 300 million or 300,000, the top 300 people have more money than the bottom 3.5 billion. More wealth, assets, everything, more wealth. So this is true in every industry conceivable, because these are the new companies, the unicorns. Companies that are less than 10 years old, that are expanding very, very quickly. It's called exponential growth. They grow 7 to 10% per year. Sorry, 7 to 10% per week, sustained usually for about a couple of years, and then they stabilize around 5 to 7% per week. That's more than doubling every month, which means that in just 2 or 3 years, you become a billion-dollar company. And then once you're a billion-dollar company, like it happened with Uber, you can become a monopoly almost immediately. And yes, you have a few other players, Easy Taxi and Lyft, but you put them all together, they don't make even half of the market cap of Uber. It's an essential monopoly. So we're becoming an economy with lots of monopolies, lots of industries that are changing very rapidly, and lots of unicorn companies that take a big share of the pie and employ very, very few people. So what does it mean? It means that a company like Airbnb, which didn't exist or was almost nothing 5 or 6 years ago, now is worth $25 billion. Uber now is worth $50 billion. Uber now is the biggest provider of houses and rents for vacation. It's bigger than the Hilton. It's bigger than Radisson. It's bigger than the Holiday Inn. It's bigger than all of the other competitors. And this happened in 5 years. It didn't happen in 50. And the next industry, this is going to happen in 2 years, or 1 year, or maybe 1 month. You become a billion-dollar company in 1 month. There will be a billion-dollar company which goes from 0 to $1 billion in 1 month in a few years. So that's for companies. What about for individuals? What about for professionals? Because they've asked me to give some advice, because I think people now are a little scared. Okay, who's scared? Nobody's scared. Okay, you are very brave. If this is just forecasting bullshit. Okay. This is the Gaúcho way. Okay. So if I go to Paulista, I'll be like, oh, whoa. And if I go to Rio, oh yeah. Okay. Okay. So professionals are changing the way they approach business and the way they present themselves to business. If you're a developer, it doesn't really matter for the best companies like Google, Facebook, Uber. It doesn't matter if you went to Stanford or to Harvard or whatever. It matters your GitHub profile, your Stack Overflow account. They look at that. That's your CV. And for marketing professionals, that's also going to change. So if you're wondering, is my job at stake? Will I have a job next year or next month? Here are some predictions or forecasts, actually. If you are a sales agent in advertising, you have a 54.2% chance of being automated within the next 20 years. Half and half. This is a calculation made with the formula and the study that I referenced from Oxford. It looks at, do you come up with clever solutions? Do you have to come up with clever solutions in your job? Do you require to personally help others? Do you have negotiation skills? Do you work in tiny spaces like a cubicle or an office? If the answer is yes, you might want to rethink about your kind of job. If you're a real estate agent, you have an 86.4% chance of being automated in the next 20 years. Anybody here a real estate agent? Okay. If you're a telemarketer, you're probably being automated right now. Like, as we speak, they're firing you. Check your email right now. Like, sorry, a robot is doing your job now. Sorry. What if you want a safe job? Okay, I'll show you also some other. If you're a fashion designer, 2.1%. Creative skills, negotiation with others. Huh? If you're a software developer, you have a 4% chance. And if you're a physician or a surgeon, 0.4. Now, this is not, crystal ball future. These are forecasts. So they're only as good as the model that creates these numbers. But you get an idea of where things are going. And if you want to, because there are hundreds of professions listed, if you want to find your job, go to this link, take a picture with your phone. Tonight, go to this link here, and play around with the tool. I'll move away so you can all take pictures, even you from the sides. Okay. Now, oh, you wanna, okay, you want some more? Okay. Okay, you can also follow me on Twitter, Federico Pistono. I'll post the link, okay? Seriously, follow me on Twitter. Okay, the average business competency, half-life. That means you have a 50-50 chance of being obsolete. In 1984, it was 30 years. Quite a long time. It's a career. 2014, it's 5 years. My prediction, by 2020, every 6 months, if you don't learn new skills, you're out. So learning becomes very important to stay relevant. Because you have to prove your reputation constantly. And what is the best way to prove your reputation? To send a CV from a school that you took maybe an MBA or a degree on 5 years ago, 10 years ago, when the half-life of competency is now 5 years, it's going to be 3 years, in a couple of years, it's going to be 1 year, in 5 years or 6 months. That's not going to work. You need to establish yourself as a thought leader in a very specific niche that you become an expert in. Nobody wants someone who can do a little bit of this, a little bit of that. They want someone who's very good at something, but who's also very good at learning something new very quickly. So how do you establish yourself as a thought leader? You share your expertise. The age of closing off and doing patents and copyrights and keeping everything secret is gone, finally. This is the era of sharing. And not just sharing pictures on Instagram and Twitter. It's the era of sharing your knowledge, sharing your expertise. And that's why I started a company that actually does that. You share your expertise for free with the world. It's called Conos. It's like conocer. And it's about sharing knowledge. And in there, I also published a course called Robots Will Steal Your Job, which you can go and follow. And this is one of the ways in which I became a thought leader. I shared my expertise. My book is available also for free on my website. And people are like, oh, are you crazy? Don't you want to sell your book? How are you going to make money? Well, 1 million people have read my book online for free, but much less have bought my book. So I'm more interested in sharing ideas that are relevant, that I think are going to be helpful for others. And it just so happened that by doing that, I also became a thought leader, and I established myself as a thought leader worldwide. But that wasn't my intention. My intention was to shake people and say, hey, this is happening. Look at this. This is the data. I didn't think, oh, I want to establish myself as a thought leader, blah, 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 blah. No, no, no. I just did what I love, and I shared my expertise. And as a consequence, I became a thought leader. And this is how one can become relevant and stay relevant. So I invite you to go to Conos and publish courses where you share your expertise, or even you curate existing content and share your view of how a specific sector or a specific piece of knowledge can be accessed and learned and shared. Because there is so much content available everywhere that you don't necessarily need to create new content to be an expert. You can select content and curate it in a very specific way and say, this is marketing for fashion designers for me, for example. Or this is chemistry 101, the way I see it, the way I think is good to learn. So I suggest you to go to this website and have a look. And this is as far as the individual survival goes, either for the person or the company. But we really need to think collectively at the society, at the collective thriving. Because we live in the superstar economy now. And the superstar economy means that the top 1% makes it, then maybe 10 or 15 is struggling, and the rest will have a really hard time. So if we think about only our individual survival, unless you become one of the superstars, which is very unlikely, you are not going to make it. And even if you become a superstar, it is not a sustainable model for society, because if people don't have purchasing power, they will not be able to purchase your products even if you are a superstar. So we really need to think about society as a whole. I've been thinking about this issue for many years, and one of the most interesting proposals that I've seen is called an unconditional basic income. Now, who has heard of unconditional basic income before? Please raise your hand. Wow, okay, that's interesting. Okay, so I have to explain. What is it? Very simply put, a basic income is a sum of money that everyone receives every month from the collective or from the state or whatever you want to call it. Unconditionally, no strings attached. Whether you're poor, whether you're rich, whether you're working, whether you're not working, whether you are old, young, middle-aged, with kids, without kids, everyone receives the same exact amount of money every month, unconditionally, and can never be taken away. But you still have the economy. You still have capitalism. You still have people trading, making money. You still have industries. It's just the basis for everyone. So this is UBI. Now, who thinks that this is a good idea? Raise your hand. Interesting. Okay. So I think that before we decide if it's a good idea or not, we need to understand how it works, not just what it is. So essentially, you decouple income and work. And what I mean by that is that when we are born in this society, there is a contract with the state and with everyone else. Even if you don't sign, there is this contract, and everyone has essentially agreed to this social contract. And this contract goes like this. You're born, and unless you are seriously disabled or injured or you have some disability, you have to work to receive an income. And with that income, you go buy your stuff, you pay rent, you buy food, you buy your car, and so on. So, labor for income, income for survival. This is the cycle, this is the contract. Now what happens when labor is disappearing, you have more and more automation, fewer and fewer companies making more and more money, employing fewer and fewer people. Well, the cycle breaks. It's as simple as that. It is unsustainable to have this social contract in the new kind of system. Hypothetically, you can create a bunch of useless jobs, or everyone can be like the chauffeur or the little slave or a few trillionaires. But I don't think we want to live in a society where one person has 700 or 20,000 slaves, like one polishing the nails, the other putting the carpet when he walks, the other, I mean, this is potentially this is a society you're looking at, with more and more billionaires or trillionaires, soon to be trillionaires. There will be a trillionaire person and $1 trillion company very soon. So you decouple income and work and you break the cycle. And there is a lot of public debate. Not yet in Brazil, I can see, but in Europe and in the United States, there is a lot of debate about this issue. And there are some interesting questions. For example, how much will it cost? So what is the median income in Brazil right now? Median, not average. 2,000 reais. Okay, so a good rule of thumb for establishing an UBI is 60% of the median income. So maybe 1,300 reais. So imagine that starting tomorrow, every adult in the country gets 1,300 reais every month, unconditionally. You multiply by the number of adults, and you get how much it will cost. How many? 130 million? How many people in Brazil? 200 million. Well, that's... Adults, 150. Yeah, I thought 130. Yeah, 150 million times 1,300 reais. That's how much it will cost. You think, can you afford it? What are the techniques that you can use? What are the systems and the institutions that you would need? It's a massive restructuring. So how will you pay for it? And other important question, will people stop working? If everybody receives an income, where is the incentive to work? But there is also another aspect. So there are the technical questions that can be answered, and then there is also a very deep and profound moral question, which is this. This is the International Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and Article 25 states, everybody has a right to a standard of living adequate for the health and well-being of himself, his family, including food, clothing, housing, medical care, and necessary social costs. Essentially, they wrote this 50 years ago. So they wrote the idea of a basic income in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. But we haven't really taken on how to do it. Luckily, we're doing some experiments, and this is where you see if things work or not. Because I don't like to have philosophical debates or ideological debates, because I think they go on forever and you never accomplish anything. I like data, I like evidence, and I like to see if things work. I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a scientist, so I like to see experiments. So they have done experiments in these countries. It's interesting that nobody knows about UBI, and Brazil is one of the few countries that has implemented some sort of UBI. I think it's called Bolsa Familia. Yeah? Although it's not a real UBI, because it's a lot less. So there is 14 countries that have tried UBI experiments. But before you get too excited, it's 14 out of 200 in the world. And only 3, and Brazil was not one of them, were real UBI experiments, like full-fledged UBI, like maybe 60% of the median income. But only 2 experiments had more than 1,000 people. So we're still a long way to go before we have good data. If this was a startup or an incubator, you need maybe a few hundred startups, and maybe 5% of them will become successful. So we need hundreds of experiments to see which ones will work and how. These are the 2 experiments. Canada, it was done in the 1970s. About 10,000 people received the basic income, 10,000 people didn't. So you have a control group, like in science. And it was about $500 per month of the 1970s. So it's like $1,000. It's a lot of money. So they asked 2 questions. Will people stop working, and will people spend on what are called public bads, like drugs, alcohol, prostitution, and gambling? It turns out the answer was no and no. People didn't stop working, and people didn't spend money on drugs and prostitution. No more than the control group. Okay, so no difference. What was interesting is that hospitalization rates fell by 8.5%. And then we're like, why? Like, people are not going to the hospital as much as they used to. Well, they looked at the behavior, and they saw that people were more happy. They spent more times with their family, more times with their friends. They took more walks in the woods and the parks. They took more care of themselves. They were eating better, and so they didn't have as many accidents or cases of bad health. There were only 2 groups that worked a little less. Women who were pregnant and then had a baby, they stayed longer with the baby. Okay, that's good. And young men, they were going to work later. So they were not working as much. And I say, why? Well, because they were finishing school. Okay, that's good too. So you had 3 positive effects that were completely unaccounted for when you began the experiment, because they were thinking, will people stop working, and will people spend on public beds? Those were the 2 things they were accounting for. None of them were true, but 3 other good things happened that they didn't expect. The other experiment was done in India, complete opposite. Rural India, $4 a month. Seems very, very little, but in rural India, it's 40% of the subsistence. $4. Huh? Now, the interesting thing is they had 6,000 people, 6,000 didn't receive, and it's, again, always in the same place, so the same village. 6,000 in the same village, all the same. 6,000 in the control group, all the same. This was very recent, 2011, 2013. What was incredible is that criminal behavior collapsed, like 80%. People went out of debt, chronic debt. They stopped, in fact, alcohol and gambling, because a lot of people were in depression because they were in debt. And now they had liquidity, which they could spend on to pay off the debt, and then they could use to make renovations in the house, to send their girls to school, because before they had only a little money, they sent the boys to school, because the girls in India. But when they had some money, they were like, hey, wait a minute, maybe it's a good idea to send girls to school. The government has been trying for 30 years to incentivize farmers to send girls to school, and nothing worked, ever. They said, we'll give you rice, we'll give you cattle, we'll give you blah, 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 and they will always find a way around it. But when they just give money and say, do whatever you want, people find out what works for them. And this is because a basic income is minimal government intervention. It only gives you money, and then it says, you do whatever is best. But with the called means-tested, or strings-attached programs, the government has to calculate and account for all the variables and think of all the possibilities. And it's a huge machine, it's very inefficient, there is lots of corruption. All the way, every time you have a middle step, you have corruption. Somebody taking a bribe, when they were sending the rice, for example, there were these bags of rice, and then the women in the village, they would take off the rocks, and then half was just rocks and the other half was rice. When they did a basic income, they didn't say, we're going to send money to someone and then that someone sends the money. No. They said, this is exactly the problem. Government, institutions, and bureaucracy. We send the money directly to the people. And the only way to do that is to do digitization. So they said they have to open a bank account. And they were like, they were crazy. You open a bank account in rural India, they don't even know how to read and write. How are they going to open a bank account? I said, no problem. Message on your phone. SMS. I said, it's going to take 5 years. Your study is 3 years. You're not even going to start. They said, let's try. Experiment. 2 months in, 95% open the bank account. It was done by the United Nations. They couldn't believe it. They couldn't believe the numbers. They were like, no, this is impossible. Improve nutrition, increased in livestock, reduce illness, improve school attendance. People 3 times more likely to be entrepreneurs. 200% increase in entrepreneurship with the basic income. They were like, people are going to stop working. No, they were working 3 times as much. And they're starting their own businesses because they were taking risks. Because when you have income, you can start businesses, you can take risks. So like, no, we don't believe these numbers, the United Nations. They said, let's send someone else. So the Indian government sent their own people to look at the numbers, and they found out that they were actually better than what the United Nations discovered. And now they're doing 1,000 experiments in India, because this was the best way they found that would fix poverty. Oh, by the way, this is interesting because that money was the same money that was spent on the other village with the conditions. So it was not new money. It was the same exact amount, but instead of giving it via means tested, they were just giving the money to people. People know best how to use their resources because you as a government cannot account for the creativity of all of the individuals and all of their entrepreneurial spirit. This is the great thing about the free market, that someone with creativity can come up with clever solutions. But if you have all these stupid government programs with means tested, and I'll give you this if you do that, and blah, 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 and you have corruption all the way, these are not the results. These are results when you allow people to find meaning and do what they love. So these are promising results, but they're not conclusive because we need a lot more. As it's 2 experiments. We need 1,000 experiments. And we need them in many countries. So the city of Utrecht in the Netherlands has already started an experiment this year. And Finland, entire country, is considering using a basic income starting next year. There is also Switzerland having a referendum at the end of the year. And you are going to think, oh, but the big banks and the big corporations are going to oppose the basic income. No, they're not. Because basic income means that everyone has disposable income to spend. So you create a middle class, and the middle class is the backbone of the economy. So smart people, even billionaires, especially billionaires, because they're usually smart, they understand this. So the chief economy at Citigroup just endorsed the basic income, for example. And also Johann Rupert, the CEO of Richmond and this luxury giant, he was speaking at the Financial Times Summit last month, and he cited my book as a way to start a conversation because it's such an important issue. So what do? Here's my advice to you. You need to embrace technology. Do not fear technology, because technology can help you if you use it in the right way. And please raise your hand if you want change. Who wants change? Come on. All right. Who wants to change? So don't just ask for stuff. Yeah? You need to become the change you want to be. It's a lot easier to ask everyone else to do something. It's a lot more difficult to take responsibility and to do it yourself. So this is my advice to you. And I hope that you will change for the better and that you will be an example to all of the people around you and that you will be an inspiration so that they can change for the better. Because we're all in this together, and we can only do it if we're thinking collectively to help everyone and not just helping ourselves. Because when we are changing for the better, we are helping ourselves and we are helping everyone else. Thank you very much.
Bem, ano passado nós tivemos... Federico conhece o Martini? Não. Não conhece? Um amigo nosso. Ano passado ele esteve aqui na ADVB falando sobre um tema muito parecido. Te confesso que ele falou em português, eu não entendi nada. E hoje tu falou em inglês e eu entendi muita coisa. Das coisas que eu entendi, tu perguntou em determinado momento para a plateia se estávamos assustados, né? E não sei se a gente manda de volta para a Itália, se tu tem certeza, vão perguntar se tu tem certeza de tudo que tu falou. Mas o presidente Bismarck disse que no início ele lançou o lenço contra choro ADVB. E no meio da palestra eu estava quase criando aqui o papel higiênico ADVB, tá? Aproveitando esse congresso. Porque realmente o que tu fala e o que tu traz para nós é uma coisa absolutamente, não nova, mas que faz parte da vida da gente, que muitas vezes a gente não quer enfrentar ou quer reconhecer essa mudança e essa realidade que nós estamos vivendo agora, não de muito tempo, mas uma realidade recente. Beto Roberto Siroski, vamos lá, está contigo a palavra, vamos abrir esse debate.
Maravilha. Bom, boa tarde a todos. Primeiro eu queria agradecer o convite da ADVB, é um prazer participar desse painel, parabenizar o Federico com essa palestra bastante inspiradora, provocativa, tenho certeza que trouxe várias reflexões, insights e muitas dúvidas também. E muito bacana estar ao lado do Dado, meu grande amigo. A gente conversa bastante, troca figurinha de como a tecnologia está impactando na vida das pessoas. Bom, eu vou trazer algumas reflexões, algumas crenças que eu tenho, depois a gente já inicia o debate. Vou tentar trazer um pouco mais para a nossa realidade, e o público daqui hoje tem muitos profissionais ligados ao marketing. Então, primeiro eu queria falar um pouquinho sobre a relação da tecnologia com as marcas. E, primeiro, assim, eu tenho uma convicção, uma crença muito forte no poder transformador da tecnologia. Para mim, a tecnologia trouxe um empoderamento para as pessoas. Hoje as pessoas têm muito mais acesso, muito mais informação, muito mais consciência e, consequentemente, um poder de escolha muito maior. Isso acaba gerando uma evolução nas relações entre pessoas com pessoas. A gente vê isso no nosso dia a dia, todo mundo usando a tecnologia, o WhatsApp, por exemplo, para se relacionar. pessoas e instituições. Acho que nas eleições do ano passado ficou muito forte isso. Até a gente pode questionar se passou um pouco do ponto, mas o fato é que as pessoas utilizaram as redes para se manifestar. E pessoas e marcas. Então, nesse contexto, eu acredito muito que as marcas elas têm que usar a tecnologia para ser importante para as pessoas, para entregar, seja um serviço, seja próximo às pessoas. As marcas, de alguma forma, elas têm que ser verdadeira e útil para as pessoas. Então, eu acho que essa é a reflexão que todo profissional de marketing deve fazer, que hoje o digital, ele, na minha concepção, não é somente um meio, é uma forma diferente de se relacionar. Então, acho que todos os profissionais devem ter essa noção. Entrando um pouquinho sobre a apresentação do Federico, no ano passado eu tive o privilégio de fazer um curso na Singularity, um curso de uma semana, e para mim foi muito transformador. Dentro dos assuntos que foram debatidos lá, a parte sim, de empresas exponenciais, que o próprio Gustavo falou um pouco hoje de manhã e tu trouxe rapidamente, para mim foi um assunto que marcou bastante. O Salim Ismail, que ele é um dos professores da Singularity, e ele é o vice-presidente do Yahoo, ele escreveu um livro chamado Exponential Companies, que é um dos livros mais vendidos da Amazon, e eles trazem exatamente assim, exemplos de empresas exponenciais e o que essas empresas fazem de diferente. Então, ele cita o próprio Spotify, Airbnb, Uber, e tem algumas características dessas empresas que eu acho que é legal compartilhar e que realmente, de alguma forma, traz uma inspiração para os nossos negócios, né? Então, essas empresas sempre têm um propósito muito forte, uma causa muito forte, e isso é fundamental. Um outro ponto que são empresas normalmente descentralizadas, horizontais, e para mim o mais importante é que elas conseguem fazer muitos protótipos e ter ciclos de feedback rápido. E eu acho que isso é muito uma cultura do Vale do Silício, a cultura da inovação e de valorizar o erro, entender como o erro parte de um processo de inovação. E isso, no Brasil, muitas vezes, o empreendedor ou uma empresa que faz alguma coisa diferente e não dá certo, é tido como fracassado, como não foi bem. Então, acho que isso é uma questão cultural que, no Brasil, a gente deveria modificar e aprender com eles. Então, acho que isso aqui também serve como reflexão para os profissionais que estão aqui. E, para fechar essa parte inicial, se a gente for olhar para trás, os últimos 10, 15 anos, a tecnologia impactou poucas indústrias, indústria da comunicação, música, entretenimento, mas acho que é muito pouco perto do que está por vir. Com a evolução dos drones, Bitcoin, inteligência artificial, robótica, eu acho que a transformação que a gente vai ver daqui em diante vai ser ainda muito maior e com ciclos cada vez mais rápidos. Citou alguns exemplos, e em 2025, mais da metade das 500 maiores empresas do mundo ainda não existem. Então, são dados muito marcantes, mas que eu enxergo isso como uma grande oportunidade. Eu voltei da Singularity muito entusiasmado a colocar na prática, a pensar em coisas para os nossos clientes, de realmente aproveitar esse momento único que a gente está vivendo para realmente fazer coisas transformadoras. Acho que muitas pessoas acabam ficando assustadas com esse momento de mercado e tal, mas eu enxergo pelo contrário. Acho que tem uma grande oportunidade e quem aproveitar a oportunidade realmente vai ter sucesso daqui em diante.
Obrigado, Beto. Federico, queres comentar em cima do que o Roberto falou?
I very much agree. I think he brought up some good points, and one of them is really this rapid prototyping. So, in a big organization, you might take 6 months to a year to do the simplest prototype. Like you need to get approval, and then you need to get a personnel, and then you need to ask managers and da-da-da-da. In a startup, you just say, okay, let's do this. 2 days later, you have a prototype. Maybe 2 hours later. Tom Chi, a friend of mine, he was one of the founders of Google X, which is the secret branch of Google where they do all the crazy stuff. He was the one who invented Google Glass. And they had the idea of doing Google Glass. One day while I were at the campus, and they were like, there was this thing about virtual reality, and they were looking at Nintendo and 80s technology, and they're like, wouldn't it be cool if we did one now, like with today's technology? They're like, how would it look like? I don't know. I guess something like in your head. Okay, so they went to literally a Radio Shack. They drove 5 minutes to Radio Shack. They bought a frame, $2. Then they bought a $10 disposable camera, duct tape. They literally duct taped the camera on the frame, and then they made some Arduino connection, soldering. 2 hours later, they had a prototype of Google Glass. 2 hours. From idea to product in 2 hours.
well, from idea to prototype. Then it took a year to get the product, but the idea that, and not just on software, even physical things, you can go from an idea to building something that can become a product, maybe $1 billion product in 2 hours. This is the new companies. And it happened with software because it was easier before, but now it's also happening with our hardware. And this is just one of the examples of how fast things are changing.
Com certeza. Obrigado. Dado, tua vez.
Bom, antes de mais nada, estou encantado pelo convite, muito obrigado. Eu estou achando o modelo de evento espetacular. E nós jantamos ontem à noite e eu disse para o Federico, eu não vou conseguir polemizar com você porque eu concordo com 100% do que você fala. E tem vários alunos meus aqui na plateia e eles sabem que eu sempre fiz essas previsões não baseado em Big Data, mas baseado em entrevistas, em conversas, porque eu sou um pesquisador. E o que eu tenho visto é que, eu até escrevi um livro dizendo o mundo mudou bem na minha vez, porque num passado não tão distante, década de 80, 70, jovem era jovem, aberto ao novo, e velho era velho, resistente à mudança. E eu fui pesquisar por que velho era tão chato quando eu era criança e quando eu era adolescente. E eu descobri que os velhos eram chatos porque eles não duravam. Então eu tinha um tio muito chato, com 65 anos, que incomodava os primos no encontro de família, e os meus primos se irritavam com meu tio, e eu dizia, deixa o tio, ele tem 65 anos, ele não dura 5 anos. Tá? E o que acontece comigo, eu tenho 54 e eu tenho filhos de 11 e 13 anos. O que eu espero para mim é no mínimo 98. Então, eu tenho mais 44 anos de vida. Quem é que vai aguentar um velho chato 44 anos? Entendeu? Então, eu tenho que ser um velho que se recicla. Então, por isso que eu acho que...
Tu vai nos ensinar depois esse
caminho?
Sim,
tá. Já está combinada, a jogada combinada. Então, nós temos um volume brutal de pessoas em todos os campos da atividade humana que estão no auge da sua sapiência, da sua sabedoria, do seu conhecimento, que porque a sociedade está se juvenilizando, essas pessoas estão sendo postas para a rua, estão virando Dalits, como lá na Índia, né, aquela casta intocável, por um motivo singular, que é resistência à digitalização. Então, eu sou uma startup que está começando essa semana, um movimento para digitalizar essa velharada toda acima de 29, 30 anos. É porque vocês não convivem com gente da geração Z, nascida neste século. Quem convive sabe que tem mais de 28 anos é velho. Então,
o Federico é velho agora.
O Federico está no limite. Então, eu acho que é mais fácil uma pessoa madura aprender mínimos conhecimentos de codificação, become a coder, virar um programador, do que um jovem recém-saído das fraldas ter toda a experiência que eu tive. Então, assim, é uma pena eu não fazer esse salto para o futuro, porque eu tenho quase 5 décadas de vida útil. Então, depois a gente, não sei se é agora ou mais tarde, a gente mostra.
Não, pode chamar o teu...
Então,
que, inclusive, depois tu me disse que tu quer que o Gustavo bote no Spotify, né?
Isso, eu quero que depois...
Então,
você vai ver, Gustavo, minha proposta para o Spotify. É o vídeo. Pode apagar as luzes aí. Não posso dar pra trás, não posso me entregar. Eu sou gente que faz, vou sempre me atualizar. Se fosse antigamente, os caras me julgavam velho. Hoje depende da minha mente, esse papo é muito sério.
1, 2, 3, digeriatria chegou de vez. 1, 2, 3, digeriatria chegou de vez. Hoje tem o velho jovem que se atualiza e vai atrás. Agarra o digital e aprende sempre mais. Posso até ter barriguinha de churrasco e coisa e tal, mas meu cérebro de tanquinhos, tudo é bom e não faz mal. 1, 2, 3, digeriatria chegou de vez.
Isso aí.
Bem, nós temos aqui uma pergunta, vou pedir para a produção, encaminhada pelo Ricardo Filizola, que é presidente do Conselho de Administração da Autos. Por favor, Federico.
Nesse Congresso de Marketing da ADVB, me cabe fazer uma pergunta de tecnologia para o Federico Pistono. Num mundo conectado, tendo a nuvem como grande depositório de toda a informação da humanidade, procurando se fazer um plano de marketing com uma grande meta, com uma meta audaciosa, que tipo de análise e de que forma deve-se usar toda essa infraestrutura para se chegar onde se quer? Muito obrigado.
Federico, e aí?
So I just want to be sure that I understand the question. It's about the cloud and how to use that as an infrastructure for your business to move forward. Was that the question? Or?
Is the cloud like, yes. Yeah, it is. Nós fazer um plano de marketing, deve fazer toda essa infraestrutura. Eu vou repetir a pergunta aqui, para não ficar dúvida. A nuvem é o grande depositório de toda a informação da humanidade. A nuvem é o grande depositório de toda a informação da humanidade. Ao se fazer um plano de marketing, como deve-se utilizar toda essa infraestrutura para se chegar aonde quer? Clear?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. How many minutes do I have for this question?
How many minutes? We have 35 minutes, but if you can use just 5.
Just 5. Okay. That's a big question. So the cloud is, like every technology, it's a double-edged sword. But in particular, the cloud is very, very edgy as a sword. So the cloud can help you. So, for example, I'll take the example of my startup. We are deploying in 4 different continents our code base. We are optimizing for where you're located. We have servers spread out around the world. We use cloud services. We use several cloud services and APIs. So essentially services that do things for us, and we just make calls and receive back information. So we don't have to build everything anew. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel all the time. And this is how most startups and most companies that want to scale fast are using the cloud and cloud services in general to move forward. But you also have some very big problems with that, because you are essentially becoming dependent on these services, and when the government in that country changes its laws or goes crazy or has some weird thing, then you are suddenly trapped. I'll give you an example. There was a very, very good service for encrypted email called Lava Mail, and they had a lot of customers. Lava Mail. Lava como lava, um vulcano. And it was encrypted, and so you couldn't read the email if you intercepted it. Not even the Lava Mail people. So they did not know what the email was because it's encrypted and you need your private key to open. Essentially, it's a way to keep secure information. Then the NSA said, we want the keys. And they said, we have 1 million customers, and this is the agreement that we have with our customers. This is the only reason why they use our service, because it's encrypted. And the NSA said, you have to give us your keys, or we will shut you down, we will hunt you down, we will destroy your life. They said they threatened the CEO to destroy their lives, they were like, oh, so you have 2 daughters and she goes to school. They were like, what, are you the mafia? What? Crazy, right? And the CEO of Lava Mail decided that in order not to betray their 1 million customers, or whatever number was, he said, we are going to shut down the service. And they destroyed all the data. Because for them, their integrity and their relationship with their users was more important than bending to the wills of a government, in particular, the NSA and the United States government. This is just one of the many examples. Then there are many other examples. If you rely, for example, on a service called CloudFront, a very used service for distributing the load on the web pages, so they load faster. CloudFront had some serious issues in certain areas, and you don't know about it. The way you know about it is people tweeting to your account saying, I can't access your website, and they post a screenshot. And you're like, oh, what's going on in Argentina? And like, all of the Argentina cannot see your website, and you don't know why. And then you open a ticket, and they're like, so, I mean, these are very, very serious issues from, the security perspective, from the operational perspective, your relationship with your customer, your ability to be subject to the whims of certain governments or not. These are very, very important issues, and in particular is where the data is. If you use a cloud service, you do not own your data. And this is your data, but you do not have power to control it. So they are very useful, and they make things very quick, and they're very cheap. But there is the other face of the medal.
Beto, comentário em cima da...
Na verdade, sim, eu concordo com os pontos que ele trouxe, e eu queria fazer uma pergunta adicional, que no ano passado, na Singularity, a gente discutiu muito esse tema, mas a gente não saiu com uma conclusão. Eu queria ouvir a tua opinião, que é em relação aos robôs numa agência de publicidade. Se discutiu muito se um robô pode participar de um processo de brainstorming, se o robô consegue, de alguma forma, ter uma ideia e contribuir num processo, uma discussão de brainstorming. O que se falou muito é que o processo criativo é muito o repertório de cada um. Então eu tenho meu repertório, tenho o repertório, tenho dele. Se daqui a pouco programar tudo isso dentro de um robô, ele vai conseguir ajudar. Por outro lado, tem toda a parte da sensibilidade, a questão intuitiva, que o robô vai ser mais complicado de conseguir apoiar. Então, eu queria ouvir a tua opinião. Se tu acha que um robô vai poder participar de um processo de brainstorming de uma forma efetiva?
That's a very interesting question. How many minutes for this?
Okay. You have 5 more minutes for this.
So, let me see how I can... Okay, so to participate, yes. To participate. The thing is, the robot or the algorithm will not know or understand that it's participating. So, right now, an algorithm is already helping in the brainstorming sessions. Like right now, when you have to come up with a logo or a name, what do? You search on Google Images, for example. Google Images is a very smart algorithm that if you say, woman sitting on a chair with a red carpet, it will find women sitting on a chair, red carpet. But if you say, and let's say, okay, it's easy, just pattern recognition. Well, it's not easy, but we can get to that. But if you say joy, you want a picture of joy. What does joy look like? Let's say the value of your company is joy, for example. The value on express of a campaign, marketing campaign is joy. And you type joy on Google Images. And you come up with things and you're like, oh wow, that's a great idea. That was an intelligent algorithm or a robot already giving you inspiration for your brainstorming. Of course, they didn't understand your concept of joy the way you understood it, but it was already helping. So in participating, I think it's already happening, and it will happen more and more. What I think we are still a long way to go is to be able to understand the need, come up with a creative solution, and then implement the solution. The whole chain now requires a human. But in many steps, robots can help, which means that if you need 1,000 people before, you still need people, but you only need 100, or maybe you only need 10. So you're replacing a lot of people, or you're making the work of the people already there more effective, but you still need someone. Yeah.
Dado, eu vou fazer mais uma pergunta aqui para a produção. É uma pergunta do Thiago Matos, futurista e cofundador da perestroika. As perguntas estão sendo traduzidas?
É um amigo.
Yeah?
Um amigo.
Know him?
Muito bom. É.
Vamos lá. Pergunta do Thiago.
Boa tarde, ADVB. Obrigado pelo convite. Desculpa não estar presente no evento, mas obrigado por poder fazer parte de uma outra forma, fazendo uma pergunta para o meu grande amigo Federico Pistono. Federico, eu tenho duas perguntas em uma. A primeira é sobre futurismo, é sobre tecnologias exponenciais, é sobre novas formas de pensar. Eu queria que tu dividisse com o público quais foram os pensadores, os livros, os documentários que mais te influenciaram, que mais moldaram a tua forma de enxergar o mundo hoje. E a segunda pergunta é sobre impacto positivo, né? Nós dois, a gente teve a oportunidade de imergir por 4 semanas dentro desse universo, e eu queria saber qual é a tua sugestão para as pessoas que não trabalham nessas áreas base, como educação, aprendizagem, como saúde global, como segurança, como água. Que sugestão tu daria para que essas pessoas enxergassem esse universo de uma forma diferente? Valeu? Obrigadão.
Did you catch that?
Yeah. Thiago, no problem. I understand Thiago.
I knew the answer before.
Thiago is a good friend. He came to Singularity with me, and then I went to Perestroika 3 years ago to give lectures at his school. So the first one was about documentaries and thinkers, and yeah.
Right.
So I think I'll give you one. I'll start with sci-fi, science fiction. So I think even though it's a very old text, Isaac Asimov's Foundation was a huge influence on my thinking. And how many here are familiar with Asimov's Foundation series? Okay, just maybe 5%. We are the old ones. So it's about the rise and collapse of civilizations and forecasting in thousands of years into the future. I will not say much more other than it's one of the best books ever written, and you have to read it to understand human societies in the long term. And it's really amazing. Then a non-fiction book called Hackers, the Heroes of the Digital Revolution. Stephen Levy, in 1990, he wrote this book. I was 5 years old, and I read it when I was maybe 10, in 1995. And then I decided to become a hacker. And I started, I was 10, 11, I asked for a computer, and it was like a Commodore 64. And then I got the Commodore 64, I started programming on the Commodore. And then when the 286 came out, I asked for the 286, and I was one of the first people in Italy with an internet connection. And anybody old enough here to remember the and then the lights. If there was silence, you were connected. If there was noise, fuck. So it's a great book. Hackers, the Heroes of the Informatics Revolution. It was about the development of all the computer industry and all the great hackers, Rotblat and the people at Stanford and the Homebrew Computer Club, and how they built. They created the industry before Apple, before IBM, before the mainframes, before everything. It was just a couple of kids in their garage, literally. But that was 20 years before Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs. 20 years before. They were building laptops before there were computers. They were literally putting things together, soldering, and building machines. And with those, they could do things. They could solve problems. And when I was reading it, I was very inspired, because it means that in the past you needed a lot of capital. You need land. You needed to be a nobleman. You needed that kind of established power to have an impact. And there was only few people. But suddenly with computers, if you just had smart, a lot of patience and a lot of grit. You sit down there and you try and you can solve problems. And that to me was very empowering, because it means that you don't have to be the son of this man, or you don't have to have that much in the bank account. I was from a poor family in a very unremarkable part of Italy, in a small town. No resources, no access, no money, no connections. And I decided, I'm going to make a difference, and this is where I'm going to start.
Great. Dado.
Eu normalmente não gosto de falar de política, mas a rapidez dos acontecimentos, a rapidez dessas empresas saindo do nada e virando empresas de bilionários. O que a gente faz com essa gente? Colocamos eles num reservado, assim. Nós chamávamos na minha infância de chiqueiro. Era um pequeno espaço, só que as crianças que estão no chiqueiro, que não entendem nada do nosso mundo, são as que estão regendo a nossa vida. O que a gente faz com eles? Porque eu acho que a geração nascida neste século não vai suportar a lentidão e a falta de visão dessa gente como nós ainda suportamos. O que você acha disso?
Okay. I think we need to start thinking about values again. Values like solidarity. Values like maybe not compassion, because compassion is a bit like, oh, you poor person, da, da, da. It's more like, okay, we are literally all here together. I mean, if you look at the scientific view, that we are all the same race. You know that there are no races. The idea of black, Hispanic, Indo-European, Chinese, it's all bullshit. There is only one race, the human race. So it's not like species and races as a subset of species. We're all the same race. We're all brothers and sisters, and we're all here together, and we only have one planet. And even if Elon Musk manages to go to Mars, it's still going to be just a few people, at least for a few decades. We need to make it work together, and this is literally the only way. And I'm hopeful that we can make it, because I see that breakthroughs in technology are very fast, but breakthroughs in societies are also getting faster. Not as fast as technology, and that's the gap. The gap between technology and culture is the problem, but it's happening faster. For example, it took more than 100 years to abolish slavery. But it took only 50 years then to give women's rights in most countries. And now it took 20 years to give gay rights in most countries. And the next wave, it's going to take 10. And then it's going to take 5. And then it's going to take 3. So I'm hopeful that we can find new balances and new shared collective awareness of the fact that we are all here together and we're all the same. We are all the same. And Brazil is a very good example of this, because we're all mixed in Brazil here. It's amazing. Beautiful country. I love it.
Ok. Beto, eu sei que tu tem mais uma pergunta. Depois eu quebrar um pouco o protocolo. Aplausos pelo... E vou passar para que algum de vocês... O Frederico tinha uma pergunta quando nós estávamos caminhando do almoço. Eu vou te passar o microfone para que tu formule ela. Tá? Beto, vai embora.
Frederico, tem um assunto muito recente que vem sendo discutido, qual é o limite da robótica, qual é o limite da inteligência artificial. O Elon Musk, que é fundador do PayPal, da Tesla, que é um cara super visionário, ele doou um valor significativo para uma instituição que estuda os limites da robótica. De tão preocupado que ele está, que a robótica vai tomar conta, daqui a pouco vai passar por cima das leis da robótica, e os próprios robôs vão programar e vão começar a tomar conta de tudo. Então, é uma preocupação que já começa a aparecer e eu queria ouvir a tua opinião sobre isso.
Yeah, so the institution is called MIRI. It's the Machine Intelligence Research Institute. I happen to know many of the researchers. In fact, I'm writing a paper with one of them, Roman Yampolsky, who's one of the leading researchers in AI, and especially AI risks. So we're writing a paper together on malevolent artificial superintelligences. Yeah, and you ask for the limits. So the limits. Okay, I'll give you a lower bound. So at a minimum, they can be like us. How do I know this? Because we are machines. Think about what we are. Okay, we have DNA. What's DNA? It's a code. Instead of ones and zero, it's A, C, G, T. 4 letters instead of 2, but it's a code. You take any cell from your body, you can make an exact replica of that body. That's software. It is literally software. And then you think about proteins. What are proteins? They are molecular-sized nanobots. They use covalent bonds like hydrogen bonds and so on, to create bonds among the cells and establish relationships and create chains. But this is essentially robotics. So we are an example of nanoscaled robots or nanobots. So at a minimum, they can be like us. But if you look at the theoretical minimum, you can go much, much lower. And in fact, there is some calculation in the Singularities Near by Kurzweil and many other, even scientific papers, not just popular science. You can go almost to the femtoscale, which is 1 billion times smaller than our cells and the scale there. Which means that you could have, in theory, something as big as this that's 1 billion times smarter than you. Or me, or anyone. Or really, you can have something the size of a human being 1 billion times smarter than the entire human race. So these are the limits probably of robotics and computation, but it's going to take some time. But I'm not sure if I answered your question. Okay.
Ok, vamos quebrar então um pouco o protocolo. Federico, dá o microfone ali para o Federico formular a pergunta dele. Federico, quando vinha do almoço, estava preocupado com esse novo mundo.
Não esperava por essa do Ricardo, mas é uma preocupação antiga minha, que a gente vê o mundo, e estava conversando com o palestrante durante o almoço também, uma preocupação de muitos anos, a gente vê a tecnologia roubando empregos, como ele está colocando. Então, ontem eu passei o dia na Expo Inter, dá para ver que as máquinas no campo já estão sem piloto, já estão operando sozinha em alguns casos. Vem aí o carro sem motorista, os elevadores não têm mais aquela coisa horrorosa que era o assessorista, e assim por diante. Então, todos os empregos de uma menor qualificação estão acabando. Então, são milhões de pessoas que estão ficando sem emprego, sem condição de uma reciclagem. Então, a preocupação, a pergunta era, já que a tecnologia está criando empregos lá em cima e tirando milhões de empregos lá embaixo, o que a gente vai fazer com essa gente toda, sem falar nos 20 milhões de pessoas que estão sem pátria também, né? Esses imigrantes todos que ficam perambulando por aí, e a Itália sofre bastante com isso. O que vai acontecer com essa gente?
O que tu acha, Federico?
Yeah, so I think there are many issues that you brought up. For example, the issue of immigration. You have to look at where the people are coming from. So I was giving before the example of the border between the United States and Canada, and the border between Mexico and the United States. How many people, how many Canadians are jumping off fences to enter the US? Okay, same question for Mexico. What is the difference? The difference is in Mexico, there are no effective institutions. If you have private property, you don't know if tomorrow some drug lord is going to come and take it away from you or kill your family. You don't know if you can get retribution or compensation for things that you're supposed to have compensation for. You don't know if the policeman you're going to talk to is bribed by some politician or some drug cartel. You don't know because you don't have effective institutions. And the same goes for Europe now. It's getting all this wave of immigrants from Syria, from Tunisia, from Algeria. It's because there it's impossible to start a business. It's impossible to have a reliable source of income and to show that you own a certain property, that you own a certain business that you're operating. If you don't have securities, if you don't have private property, if you don't have effective institutions, you're always risking your life literally every day. So how can you build a family? How can you provide for your kids? How can you feel safe? So it's obvious that these people leave because they don't feel safe where they are. So before the issue of automation hits those countries, there is already a problem, which is the lack of effective institutions and the lack of being able to express and have retribution for the property you have. Hernando de Soto, the Peruvian economist, is very vocal about this, and he's probably going to win the Nobel Prize soon for his research. So there we have a big problem to solve, and the issue was that we have given billions and billions and billions in aid to the institutions which were ineffective. So you give billions to Nigeria, what's going to happen? Well, it goes to the warlords, it goes to the militia, it goes to the people who have guns that are sold by US corporations and European corporations. Gun manufacturers, they give the guns to warlords in Africa, and then Fiat Chrysler sells the ambulances. It's a perfect business. You sell the mine, the bomb, and then you sell the prosthesis. It's wonderful, wonderful business. So if you don't fix this, you're not going to get anywhere. As for developed countries, where automation is already a problem, and it's going to be more of a problem soon, it's going to get even worse because you have people, coming into the industrialized nations looking for jobs that are not there. So there, we have to find solutions, and I think it's impossible to fix it until you realize that the system that requires labor for income and income for survival, that cycle has to stop. And one of the proposals is a basic income. And again, we're a long way. We need a lot of experiments to go. And I would like to see experiments here in Brazil with a real basic income, with an entire community. 20,000 people, 50,000 people, in a city where they try the basic income for 2, 3, 4 years, and they get results, and they try another place, and hopefully very soon we'll have enough data to know how it can be implemented, when it works, when it doesn't. Because Brazil is different from Norway or Finland, very different. So if they say, oh, in Finland it works fine, and say, oh, let's do it in Brazil. Yeah, let's talk about that. Yeah.
Ok. Nós ainda temos 8 minutos. Alguém mais da plateia fazer uma pergunta lá? Por favor, se identifique.
Bom, boa tarde a todos. Meu nome é Rodrigo, eu sou da PPG. Tenho uma pergunta para o Federico. Federico, o Brasil é um dos países que tem a maior taxa, o custo de um funcionário do mundo. Ao mesmo tempo que fala-se de robotização de funcionários, ao mesmo tempo vai contra a arrecadação de impostos e de taxas para os governos. Não sei se você tem alguma experiência de algum país de como é que o governo lida com isso, no momento que ganha-se em produtividade para a empresa, mas perde-se em arrecadação de taxas para o governo. Obrigado.
Yeah, so for example, Germany has been automating a lot, but it was able to adjust both its revenue in taxes and also the workforce, because they have very effective institutions. Very effective. So they had retrain programs. They were outsourcing all the things that were necessary so they could create new industries and new values, and then those would be heavily taxed based on their profits. So there are ways of doing it, but you cannot do it if you have ineffective institutions. If you have tax evasors, if the tax collectors are bribed, if the government doesn't do its job properly, it's very, very hard to do things. At the same time, in a place like India, where it's a hellhole in many things, because corruption is everywhere, institutions are close to non-existent in many places, you see that a basic income has raised the level of standard for an entire community in 3 years. Amazing results. They couldn't believe them. So I think there are ways to counteract this trend. And one of the most interesting proposals is called the citizens' dividend. So imagine if you consider the whole of society, Rodrigo, right? Yeah. All of society is made of, let's say that the country is a company. And all of the Fortune 500 or the Brazil 500, they are just elements within the company. Huh? And every citizen is a shareholder. So when companies make profits, they have to give the dividends at the end of the year. So citizens become shareholders of the company Brazil. This is a very innovative idea, but it's very old. It's 200 years old. So, and this is the opposite of communism, because you're actually running it in a capitalist environment where you want to make profits, and you want to make more and more profits, because the profits get divided by everyone. Clearly, the founders of the companies and so on, they will have more, so they have an incentive to make the company work. But the state has an incentive to make the whole economy work, and everyone in the state, so all the people in the companies, because they know that they will get something. So that's a very, very interesting idea that I want to see explored, and I want to see academics run the numbers and see how much it can be raised this way. But it's trillions of dollars.
Ok, Federico, obrigado. Nelson tem uma pergunta e depois nós vamos encaminhar para o final entre nós aqui. Nelson, por favor.
Boa tarde, Federico, prazer. Fiquei muito impressionado com a tua apresentação.
Obrigado.
Muito impressionado mesmo. E deixa eu me apresentar. Quer dizer, há um tempo atrás, o Roberto, que está sentado aí, pouco tempo atrás, ele era conhecido como filho do Nelson. E eu hoje sou conhecido como pai do Roberto. Inverteram-se as coisas, bem a prática desse mundo em transformação. Eu sou parte daquele mundo bem antigo. Aí vou na tua, Dado. Estou contigo.
Vai no rap,
estou contigo. Eu queria que te pedir para o Federico, que tu repetisse o nome do livro que tu está sugerindo a leitura, o livro, não sei, Asimov, né? Tem
A Fundação Asimov. Fundação de Asimov.
Mas é um nome, a Fundação de Asimov. É o nome This is the name of the book.
The Fundação, Asimov é o autor. A Fundação. E o autor é o Asimov. O autor é Asimov.
É do Isaac Asimov.
3 livros.
Ok, tá, isso eu queria saber. Segundo, você desenhou há pouco aqui um modelo fantástico de humanidade. Nós somos todos iguais, nós somos uma raça só, nós temos que viver num mundo de solidariedade, nós temos que quebrar os paradigmas das relações entre as pessoas. Eu acho esse mundo ideal, acho que nós temos que perseguir, mas acho que ele ainda é uma utopia. Eu queria te perguntar, das sociedades existentes hoje, pela tua pesquisa, qual a que está mais próxima desse mundo ideal que tu estás vislumbrando que nós temos que vivenciar?
Yeah. So, I think it's not a utopia, because a utopia would be that everyone is the same. And I don't think that's the case. We're all different. We're all different because we have different aspirations, we have different ideas, we have different talents. So you have very different talents from my talents, and it would be stupid to say that we are the same. But we are equal because we're both humans, we have the same DNA, more or less, and we have the same dignity. That's for me equal. But we're not the same. But we treat each other with respect, or we should, knowing that we are different, but equal. And I think places that are doing this very effectively is very close to my heart. I spent some time in Norway, and I have many good friends in Norway. One of my best friends been living in Norway for 25 years, and now he's a biomedical researcher there. His partner is Norwegian, and I visited for many weeks, and I stayed more than 2 months in Norway, and I've seen how amazing the culture is. Respect for life at all levels. So it's unacceptable that someone is left behind. It's not because the state says you shouldn't leave anybody behind. It's because for people, it's an unacceptable idea that someone is left behind. And the state is just an expression of the culture. It's not the opposite. So you need to change the culture, and the state never leads, the state only follows. The people have to change. It's the slide I put before. Who wants change? Everyone. The politicians, they say, yeah, I'll change everything. No. The first politician that says, I'll change nothing. You guys change, you change, and I follow. That would be a good politician, but no politician ever says that.
Essa mensagem do Federico, eu acho que tem tudo a ver com esse momento aqui, que nós estamos vivendo hoje no país. Nós somos e muito responsáveis por aquilo que está acontecendo, e nós temos que fazer esses políticos serem os nossos seguidores e não nós ficarmos permanentemente reclamando da situação que nós estamos vivendo. Caminhando então o nosso final pontualmente, Beto, último comentário, muito obrigado.
Não, foi um prazer realmente estar aqui. Bom, para fechar então, a gente falou de muitas empresas exponenciais, valendo bilhões, mas eu acho que se a gente for olhar no nosso estado, tem muitas empresas fazendo um trabalho fantástico, empresas já consolidadas, mas que têm uma visão muito forte de inovação. A gente pega exemplos como Renner, Panvel, Tramontina, que são empresas que têm a origem aqui no Sul e estão tendo um crescimento absurdo, um crescimento exponencial, porque estão enxergando a oportunidade na crise, estão acelerando na crise com uma visão inovadora e com essa pegada de realização. Então, às vezes, a gente fica muito fantasiando de olhar para fora e tal, mas aqui no nosso estado a gente tem exemplos muito legais e eu acho que cabe essa reflexão também.
Beto, muito bem lembrado, e realmente nós temos exemplos dentro da nossa casa, aqui no nosso quintal, pessoas que a gente conhece, empresas que a gente toca e que são referências daquilo que fazem. Muito bem lembrado. Dado.
Eu apenas gostaria de dizer que eu me sinto um privilegiado por ter a idade que eu tenho e o que eu tenho de vida ainda, o que eu vou poder fazer, e eu vou ver coisas muito próximas que você está dizendo. Eu sou um otimista incorrigível e gostaria também de registrar que, para mim, é um prazer um velho aqui ser convidado para estar no meio dos moços, né? Nós somos velhos, né? E dizer que, por exemplo, estar aqui no palco, tendo na plateia o Guinter e o Nelson, que são meus ídolos e referências profissionais, e eu acho muito legal ter essa idade, porque na idade que eu estou agora, eu estou do lado de dois jovens que são meus ídolos, e é muito bom ter essa idade para quando a gente troca de idade de ídolo. Como é bom quando os ídolos da gente passam a ser mais moços do que a gente. Muito obrigado.
Obrigado, Dado. Federico, muito obrigado.
Muito obrigado.
Foi um privilégio. Quer dizer alguma coisa a mais? Última mensagem?
Última
mensagem.
So Gandhi said, "Be the change you want to see in the world," and I think that was a very, very foreseeing forecast, if you will. And we should do like he said. I think if we live by that, it's better than the golden rule. And I try, with all my faults and my stumbling, but I try, and I hope that I inspire others to try. And if all of us do that, then I think we can really change.
E pode ter certeza que você foi muito inspirador para todos nós aqui nesse congresso. Muito obrigado.
Muito obrigado.